Good morning, everyone. It's September 12th, and we are convening here as the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee, and we're taking up 3 zoning text amendments, 2204, 2205, 2206. We're joined by Councilmember Jawando virtually, and Councilmember Jawando, I hear you sustained an injury playing basketball over the weekend, so I hope that you're recovering okay. Sorry about that.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we're not recovering yet. Probably gonna have to have surgery, but appreciate the well wishes, and sorry I can't be with you in person right now.
That's okay. It's a good thing we have the virtual capability, because with an injury, you don't want to have to move around a lot. So, good. All right. Well, we'll start with 2204, which is about light vehicle sales, and this is a zoning text amendment sponsored by myself, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Glass, and good morning, Ms. Nadeau.
Good morning. So DTA 2204 will allow light vehicle sales and rental indoor in the neighborhood retail zone as a limited use. So first, going through the statements we received is the RESJ impact statement, which noted that it could sustain or marginally widen racial and social inequities because it would disproportionately accrue to white business owners, but this impact would be negligible because there's a limited number of properties that would be available for this use. There are some proposed additional policies in here from OLO, including increasing county government contracting opportunities and narrowing the diversity gap in entrepreneurship. Of course, great additional policies for council to consider, but just not things that we could do in the ZTA itself, but I just wanted to raise that. Next up, we had the planning board recommendation. So planning board had 2 major points. First is that past interpretations of the auto sales use have allowed outdoor display and storage of vehicles for the light vehicle sales and rental indoor use, which I know sounds a bit confusing. And part of that distinction is that the indoor, you picture your BMW, your Audi, those types of dealerships, even a CarMax that have a lot of cars inside, versus the outdoor where it's a used car sales lot, all the vehicles are outside, and there's maybe like a trailer where you sign the papers but no vehicles are actually inside. So one of their recommendations was to fix that, and I'll get to that later when I talk about amendments. And the next was amending the actual use based on the size, the number of acres, to determine whether it should be limited or conditional. So first, I'm going to do a bit of a history lesson here. So what happened in the prior zoning ordinance is there were several automobile sales lots definitions. There was the automobile sales lot, which again is that standard used car sales lot with your trailer where you go sign your papers, but there's no cars inside, versus what was called an automobile sales retail showroom. So that's what you think of where there are display vehicles inside, lots of desks and offices, and there's also cars outside as well. But when the zoning ordinance was amended, the way the definitions read now is there's light vehicle sales and rental indoor, and then light vehicle sales and rental outdoor. And the plain reading of the indoor definition does not include outdoor storage. So this raised the question of whether your standard car dealership would have to get both permits. And in certain zones, specifically in NR, one is conditional use and one is limited. So that's obviously a lot for a dealership to go through. So the recommendation from planning that council staff agrees with is to add the phrase including outdoor storage to the light vehicle sales and rental indoor use. So those car dealerships won't have to get 2 separate permits in order to have that use. The second is the conditional use question. So the neighborhood retail zone, I'm going to quote from the code here, it says it's intended for commercial areas with a neighborhood orientation that supply necessities requiring frequent purchasing and convenient automobile access. So light vehicle sales and rental obviously doesn't require frequent purchasing. Well, very lucky if it does, but it does require convenient automobile access. So, and I'm going to quote from the planning staff report here, but it noted that while there are instances of small NR zone properties for convenience stores or other small-scale retail, much of the NR zone is for mid-sized shopping areas over 10 acres in size that are grocery store anchored and include additional inline retail and standalone retail with drive-throughs. So the planning board recommendation was to make it a limited use if it's over 5 acres and a conditional use if under 5 acres. So council staff's recommendation here is to actually change it to if the zoned area is 5 acres instead of if the site itself is 5 acres. That way you can have different size light vehicle sales and rental, but the area itself would have to be larger, so you don't end up with auto vehicle sales on a small NR parcel where you'd rather have more small everyday businesses. So those are the two recommendations before the committee.
Chairman Anderson.
I'm going to call Ben and or Jason up to discuss this in more detail, but I think we just have a little bit of a mild difference of opinion about what the point of the NR use restrictions are. I think that we, the planning board, at a minimum, and I think the planning staff, but they can speak for themselves, believe that the point of the size limitation we propose is to regulate the intensity of the use, because we recognize that NR zones are often abutting residential uses and other things that may not be compatible if they're done in a manner that's too intense. And I can think of a couple sites in the county where that's true, but it's not that we're fundamentally at odds. I just think that what Nadeau has said is true as far as it goes. If the assumption is that the point of the NR zone is to preserve land for small businesses, that's not really the way I've understood that zone, or the underlying purposes for why NR is applied. We're actually really trying very hard to get rid of NR zoning and move to CRN and the other CR family zones in any case, but I don't think it's really a small business preservation zone. At least that's not the way that we've viewed it in the past.
Okay. Is that just a is that, all right. Councilmember Friesen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just had a question. I mean, generally it would be counterintuitive for a larger site to have a lower standard and a smaller site to have a higher standard in order to protect the interests of the community based on the intensity of the use. I just want to, throw that out there. I'm not necessarily opposed to that suggestion, but I'd like to talk through that a little bit, because I think for most people, whoever is watching a PHED committee meeting of 3 zoning text amendments that they probably never heard of, but in the event that anybody has tuned in, that would seem to be counter to how we generally operate, where the larger the size of something, the more likely we are to add greater regulatory scrutiny. And the smaller something is, because the belief generally is that the smaller has lesser of an impact on surrounding properties, the lesser of that regulatory process. So could we just talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish in this zoning text amendment? Because you talked about it in the beginning, and I'm very much support that. The idea that you would have a different permit for selling a car inside a showroom than you would have to outside a showroom for the same dealership. No resident thinks of the difference between those two activities, and I'm not sure there's really a public interest rationale for why we would hold you to a completely different standard and have a completely different permit for those two things. Literally, those businesses move cars in and out of those showrooms. So I'm 100% in agreement with that. I hope we move forward with something that addresses that particular issue, because it makes no sense why we would have another standard than that. And it was my understanding when I first learned of this proposal by colleagues that was really the goal here and the interest here, that we had a regulatory regime that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense for these particular issues, and we were trying to clean that up. So I just want to kind of start with that. And the second piece of this question potentially has some consequences well beyond this particular goal of solving this particular issue, and that is related to this question of limited versus conditional use and the size of the parcel. And I really do think before we agree to move that forward, we ought to really think through what, if any, unintended consequences there might be, perhaps unrelated to this particular type of business and this particular type of scenario. So could we just quickly explain why, what the thought process is between that? I think that's the most relevant point here. I think there's broad agreement on the first part of, we don't think you should have two different permits for these activities, or at least, we can get through that. But the second piece, the amendment, could be more impactful, at least from my understanding here, than the underlying zoning text amendment itself, or at least as it was originally drafted.
Yeah, so that was council staff's instinct as well, that it was putting a more scrutiny on a smaller business, which did seem counterintuitive. In terms of the purpose of the NR zone, our thinking was that the NR zone isn't necessarily for businesses that have a regional draw. They're for local businesses that someone in the area goes to all the time, which is something that arguably a car dealership does have that. Regional appeal, and that's why limiting how many there would be. If you limit you would put it in areas that are larger NR zones versus those smaller NR zones. There's a map on the last page of the packet, and you can sort of see where all the NR zones are, and they're not very big. I looked at the MC Atlas, and the NR zones sort of range. There's, let's say, 25% of them are pretty large, like over 10 acres, but a lot of them are actually far under 5 acres. So this would make sure that we're not creating light vehicle sales and rental all over the NR zone, if the idea is the NR zone is supposed to have not too many businesses that are regional draws versus smaller.
And put it in a different way, because I would prefer to get out of the regional versus local, because I think that's but I think the same point would be the frequency of use. So a shopping center is a place, that's anchored by a grocery store, is a place presumably where many families go on a weekly basis. You do your weekly grocery shopping, or a dry cleaner. You drop off at the dry cleaner on a weekly basis. That is, kind of a normal frequency of activity. A car dealership, to your point, is someplace where you go, once or every 3 years to buy or lease a car. Maybe you go to service it, once or twice a year, or 4 times a year for an oil change, et cetera. But I think, to me, I think the frequency of the use, in terms of, who it's serving, that also would probably relate to the sphere of influence of who is using that type of use. Because if you're doing something once or twice a year, or once every 3 years, you're more likely to travel a farther distance. If you're going to your regular dry cleaner, or you're going to your regular grocery store, if you can, and we have places that don't have grocery stores or dry cleaners within a reasonable time frame, which we're trying to address, but if you can, you're likely to go to that within a proximate area of where you live, where you work, or where you do your regular, daily or weekly activities.
I'm guessing this has some relation to the analysis of where the NR properties are already, and a determination that the existing properties could pretty easily move back and forth between indoor and outdoor and without an impact. But if this use were to start to proliferate among small properties, it's questionable as to whether that's something we want to encourage, and that's why I'm sort of gathering that's the framework here. But Casey?
These aren't NR zoned, but in keeping with what Mr. Friedson just said about frequency of use, or you could look at it as local versus regional. If you think about Oarsman Honda in downtown Silver Spring, I think that's a use.
Bethesda.
I'm sorry, Bethesda. That's not NR zone, but if you just think about that as a car dealer, that's a lot of service there. People probably aren't necessarily going to Oarsman in downtown Bethesda unless they live in or around Bethesda. There's Honda dealers way up 355 that are more of a regional draw. The idea being that a small car dealership may be appropriate in a place that has, is constrained, that has a lot of other things around it, not even necessarily a central business district. Whereas if you had a 5-acre car dealership in the middle of Bethesda, that would be disruptive. And so that's kind of our thinking, is this distinction between how large is it, how much impact is it, what is the impact on the other land use objectives of the area. It tends to vary. The size bears a strong relationship to how obtrusive that type of use could be, or how inconsistent it might be with the other things that are going on in the neighborhood. So, but again, I don't mean to suggest this is like some major disagreement in principle. I just am trying to explain our thinking. And I think it's consistent with whether you think of it as regional local or frequency of use or whatever. A small car dealership that does a lot of service, like Oarsman and Bethesda, it's not just sales, but people go to get their cars serviced with some frequency because it's very convenient. That's maybe a little bit different than the place that you go that's more ex-urban, that you want to visit only when you buy the car, perhaps very infrequently for major repairs. So I'll leave it at that.
If I may,
Unless Ben has something else.
I think the other thing that's important to kind of talk about here is when we did the analysis, we were looking at what is the NR zone being used for, and that is where I think we found two very distinctive patterns. There are a lot of small, either individual properties or small areas of properties that do have more convenience stores, very small, 15,000 square foot little shopping centers in them. And then there's a number of these 10, 15, 20 acre sites that have the grocery store, the fast food restaurants, the gas stations, all as like your big community anchoring center. And we were asking ourselves, what is the externality or impact of a large busy shopping center versus a car dealership? Both of them have lots of cars coming and going from them. Both of them have lots of cars parked outside at all times. Both of them usually have large, big, boxy buildings associated with them. And so I think that's another one of the reasons that staff thought the size differential mattered, and that actually the bigger size sites actually needed a little less scrutiny because they already allow a very car-centric, very busy, very bright, potentially noisy environment, whereas these smaller sites actually don't by their nature. And so thinking about where a auto dealership that would have vehicles stored outside and might have service coming and going from, it actually seems more fitting in that sense in a larger zoned site. And so I think that's another reason why we have that site difference and why it actually is allowing less scrutiny for the larger sites, because we think they're already being used to that level of impact today. And that was a big part of what made our ultimate recommendation.
Could I ask how important to the underlying purpose of the zoning text amendment would the amendment for conditional versus limited use, at the 5 acre site be? It's not clear to me. I mean, I understand the point that you're making, and I think it is a reasonable conversation that we potentially could have. I guess the question is whether it needs to be had as part of this legislative vehicle or not.
Well, I mean, so currently in the zoning code, you cannot do auto sales indoor in the NR zone at all. And so it's a question of, do we assign it just limited, just conditional, or the split that we're proposing? The ZTA that was drafted just had it as a limited use. And I mean, that's an avenue that could be taken. I think the reason we made the change to limited/conditional is the initial ZTA also came in under the strict definition that the indoor use is only inside the building and the outdoor is only on the outside. And so if you kept that plain reading as the original ZTA came in, there isn't a lot of outdoor externalities to having an indoor only sales use because everything's happening inside. We kind of took this a step further and saying, well, if we're going to recommend amending the definition to allow outdoor display and storage, does that change the nature of the entire ZTA and the entire use? And we think it might slightly, but not substantially. And so that's where we got to our recommendation that the ZTA should be modified, but currently it's not allowed, period. So
And planning's recommendation is to base it on the size of the dealership itself, that particular unit, not the size of the underlying zone?
Yeah, I mean,
Is there a reason for that? Because, I mean, the way that you've just described it, the use of the retail setting would probably be more based on the size of the zone itself, not on an individual business within that zone, right? The larger the NR zone in that particular area, the more likely that the type of intensity of use that you're referring to already exists. And so the scrutiny, to your point, would be at the creation of the NR zone itself. Is that an appropriate place for an NR zone or not? We made that policy decision. And then if we have a large NR zone there, we have basically already made a policy decision to say that the type of intensity of use that you're talking about, that the car dealership would not necessarily have a significant impact, would be changed. I mean, am I missing
I think
something?
maybe the nuance would be, if you're looking at it at a property size, you have a single owner of a large retail establishment or shopping center that has their 5, 8, 10 plus acre property, whereas you might still have a number of little half-acre size properties that might make a 5 acre or more area of NR zone, but the scale of the development is still very small there. Now, somebody could consolidate properties and create a 5 acre property out of a bunch of smaller ones and then meet this definition. I mean, a lot of that's kind of difficult to predict because we can't predict lot consolidation and whether the neighborhood could or could not change. But I think that's why we look at it as where's the existing lots now of a certain size and what's on those larger lots. Because generally, if you have smaller lots, you're going to have smaller uses in buildings. I know there's instances where that's not always the case, and you actually have individual ownerships of each kind of unit in a shopping center. But the ones we looked at were pretty much all common owned as one bigger property.
But as you have described your recommendation, you're encouraging the consolidation of those lots. I mean, presumably, if you had the opportunity for a larger use where you would go through a much cheaper, much faster, much less rigorous regulatory review process, if you consolidate it to equal a 5 acre site, then the likelihood is you'd be encouraged. I mean, at least from our policy, we're encouraging the consolidation of those lots. I'm agnostic to whether that's a good idea or a bad idea for the purpose of this discussion, but that is what the policy that your recommendation is suggesting. That's a behavior that we want to encourage because we've created a different regulatory standard for one size versus the other vis-a-vis a particular business. So I guess I appreciate the rationale. I mean, it makes a bit more sense to me now than it did as I was reading through and both the packet and planning's recommendations. If we move forward with that type of approach between limited and conditional, I think it should be based on the underlying zone size. 5 acres is probably not an appropriate number, so I think we should think through then what that number would be. But if the idea is this isn't fundamentally changing the use because of the type of activities that are happening, to me, I think the size of the zone would have more to do with it than not. If we're not going to do that, and we want to just go in a different direction and stick with how the CTA was drafted originally, I'm okay with that too. But I think if we are going to move in this direction, it should be based on the zone size and find an appropriate number for that than underlying business. At least that's my perspective.
So council staff's recommendation had been to, instead of the limited versus conditional, keep the 5 acres, make it the zoned area, and you just wouldn't have the light vehicle sales and rental if the zoned area is under 5. So rather than having limited and conditional, you only have limited, and you only get it if the zoned area is over 5 acres and over.
Okay, I have a question pertaining to that. So near where I live, I can think of at least 2 businesses that are renting cars on small lots, half acre. One on Burlington, right by Montgomery College, as you're crossing from Silver Spring towards Tacoma Park. One on Sligo Avenue, kind of down towards Piney Branch. Are those businesses, your zoning text amendment would only apply in the NR, or would it apply across all zones? And would it essentially require those businesses in the future, if someone wanted to start one of those, to go through the conditional use process?
It would only be in the NR.
It'd only be in the NR. So, but I assume philosophically you would say it should apply to businesses in those kinds of settings, because the thrust of the ZTA is to say, in a neighborhood context, this is a high impact business, and we think that it ought to go through a conditional use And in fact, due to the, I don't know what the history of where NR was applied, but it is by no means a large amount of the actual neighborhood commercial property in Montgomery County. It's very limited in its application. So there's tons of commercial property all across the county that is very close to residential, and those properties have been, purchased and used for rental, stepping outside of the sales, because sales is a little different, although they also sell, and you can see a lot of those small lot sales, businesses as well. But so if I'm understanding the board's recommendation, it would basically say that in the future those, but only if on NR, but then why only on NR and not on the other neighborhood
Well,
CRN or whatever those properties are?
I think if these small sites you're talking about with the car rentals were NR zoned, the planning board and staff's approach would be to say, if it gets really big, it should go through conditional use. If it's smaller, then it could be a limited use.
But that's not isn't your recommendation the opposite of that? Your recommendation is, if it's big property, it's limited because, actually that makes some sense to me. And if it's small, it should go through conditional use. Nothing is ever very easy, is it?
So I'll say, in the context of our review of this, we weren't reviewing every commercial zone. Previous policy decisions were made to allow the indoor and outdoor uses, or really their predecessing uses under the older versions of the zoning ordinance, to occur in different commercial zones. We were pretty narrowly looking at, well, this is a request for the NR zone where it is currently not allowed. Had to assume there was a reason it wasn't allowed there, but it was in other commercial zones. And so our focus has been, well, what's the impact of the NR zone alone? And I don't think we've necessarily extrapolated our recommendations out to how it would impact other commercial zones. That was not really what we were looking at.
But the reasoning is, the reasoning should stand. And I think it's fair to say that if the rationale for the sub 5 acre conditional use were to apply in the NR, then it theoretically should apply in other commercial settings. And I'm not sure what I think about that,
I think the other thing to point out is the outdoor sales use is allowed in the NR zone currently as a conditional use.
Right.
And it's possible from what you're describing, I'm not as familiar with the Tacoma Park area, these might qualify as outdoor uses. They probably don't have, it sounds like a showroom where they're displaying stuff inside, and so.
Well, and I don't think they're NR, to be
Probably
clear.
not.
When I looked at the map on the last page, I see some properties probably on New Hampshire Avenue, but I don't see the properties I was referring to. So I think that they're just some other zone.
Okay, can we just go back to what is the purpose of the zoning text amendment? What are we trying to accomplish? Because we're getting caught in one particular aspect of how a little piece of this should happen, which happens to have huge ramifications, admittedly. But what is the? You were one of the sponsors. It would just be helpful. I think we should get back to.
The purpose was to allow a site that is obviously suitable for auto sales and rental to be able to do that business indoors.
Yeah. So can we here's what I would like to do. I think, can we get back to the idea that if a site is already doing either indoor or outdoor sales, they should be able to do the other, right? I mean, to me, that's the crux of this. The crux of this is, by any reasonable standard, the difference between a showroom and an outdoor space where you park the cars. Like if I'm going to buy, I went to buy a used car, relatively recently, within the last year. And I did not call and ask whether I was going to be shown a used car in a showroom. I wasn't. The used cars are outside, by the way. The new cars that are more expensive are inside. Spoiler alert. But that didn't even cross my mind as a customer. And I live near a car dealership. And I've never thought about the difference between the cars being sold inside versus outside. The type of traffic, the type of intensity of the use is exactly the same whether a car is being parked inside a glass wall or outside a glass wall. Literally. It looks the same because by definition of the type of business it is, they want to show the cars off. So these are not behind closed doors. These are glass windows that literally show in a room the car. So I guess the question is there another mechanism to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish here without getting caught up in the limited versus conditional use challenge? Because it was never the intention of the zoning text amendment, by what has been described here and what has been described in the packet, to change the locations where this type of business occurs, like to make it easier or harder to have this type of business in certain locations in the county within the NR zone. That was not the purpose. The purpose, at least as far as I can tell, was if you're already selling cars and you're allowed to do one thing, the second part of that business, you're not allowed to do that thing without going through a separate permitting process. That is an unreasonable standard. So I just want to make sure maybe I'm missing the purpose, because so it would be helpful to understand that.
So how the ZTA came about is in the commercial, residential, and employment zones. The NR zone, you could not have light vehicle sales and rental indoor at all, but you could have outdoor under conditional use. So an auto dealership that wanted to have that showroom with the new cars couldn't do that, even though they could have the cars outside.
So let's be specific, because I think it's actually very helpful. We're talking about Aspen Hill and the former Kmart property,
Yes.
which is, vacant. It's an area that needs some more, commercial retail strength. And we've got a car dealer that's been a longstanding business in the community in Wheaton, just down the road. They would like to move there, and they can't because they can sell their vehicles outdoors, but they can't have an indoor showroom. So we would like to address that and do it in a way, of course, that applies across many properties around the county, so that
Right.
this problem doesn't arise in the future. And so to me, perfectly sensible, slam dunk, case. And so we wanted to allow for that. And so that's the specific. In considering it here, we are essentially being advised to adopt a conditional use framework for these kinds of businesses that I have to say, just based on a narrow reading of my neighborhood, would make it a lot harder to set up some of the businesses that we have. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would like that, actually.
Right.
To me, I'm a little more flexible on things like that. But-
So to track how this discussion happened is a plain reading of the zoning ordinance doesn't include. I'm sorry. So a plain reading of the zoning ordinance didn't include outdoor storage. So when the ZTA was first drafted, we thought, okay, now you can have light vehicle sales and indoor, and it'll be a limited use. But once we agreed that the indoor use should include outdoor storage, because you have cars inside and outside, that's when the question arose of, well, now does it change the NR zone, and should we have some sort of restriction? So that's sort of tracking how the problem came up.
Say that again?
So what first happened?
And also, if you have a recommended solution based on what has been said, I mean, I think the last 5 minutes has been more instructive for me of what are we trying to accomplish? And Councilman Reamer got really specific about where. I know you tried to in the packet. I mean, but if you just revisit, how do we most simply accomplish the goal here as you re-explain what you just said, Ms. Nadeau? That would be helpful too.
Sure. So with no amendment, what would happen right now is there's light vehicle sales and rental indoor, and it would be a limited use, and it could include outdoor storage. So that's if you do neither council staff nor planning board's amendment, that's what would happen. And the question is, do you want a large light vehicle sales and rental indoor, or even a very small one? How concerned is the committee or council about where those are in terms of the size of both the site itself, versus the NR zoned area itself. So that's, I guess, the heart of the question in terms of which amendment to go with. It seems like 5 acres, so far it seems like everyone's in agreement on the 5 acres. It's just whether you want to make it the area versus the site, and whether it should be limited for all of them or limited based if it's bigger and conditional if it's smaller.
So based on this conversation, I'm inclined to just say make it limited use generally as originally drafted, and not proceed with the conditional use, distinction, because I just think it's solving a problem that may not exist and creating a precedent that could be an issue. So that's my thought for us based on this conversation. Ben?
The only other thing that does come to mind, and it's thinking historically of how these definitions came to be, I think if you go back many years, there was a presumption that the outdoor only, which was previously the sales lot, in some ways was actually a less physically intensive because they were almost always much smaller sites. And so there has been no discussion to date to go back and change the outdoor sales and storage in the NR zone from conditional to limited. So that would still be applied as a conditional use.
Oh, it's still conditional outdoor.
We haven't touched it because that was not part of the
So even for this
Aspen Hill
business that
site's
we know,
question.
they still have to go through the conditional use process for,
Well, no, so the ZTA amendment that we've recommended that I think we all agreed is a good one is to amend the indoor definition to allow some outdoor storage and display.
right.
And it was the idea that the indoor came from the showroom definition under the old code, which came from an even earlier definition. I dug this back in time and watched how every time the code's amended, these two uses have kind of diverged from each other to the point they don't overlap anymore. And again, I think the original intent going way back in like 60s, 70s time frame was to have one use that was the little sales lot with the trailer versus another use that was every other type of car dealership. And their paths have diverged in unfortunate ways over time. And we could have a conversation about just rewriting this whole section, but that's, I think, beyond the scope of today. And so we're trying to figure out how to at least make what we think of as a normal car dealership that you see in the county fit under one definition, which was, in our opinion, to take the indoor and just amend it to say outdoors allowed. But there is a separate use still for outdoor that would be in the NR zone and would remain conditional use.
Okay.
I just want to put that out there.
So you're saying that what we described as just the trailer and the parking lot for outdoor sales and rental would remain a conditional use, even if we don't accept the 5 acre distinction. And I don't know that I have I don't know. Yeah, thank you for stipulating or pointing that out.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So I didn't realize that. I guess the question is, I'm less concerned, honestly, about a car dealership going in Aspen Hill or some other part of the county. I think that would be, generally a positive. I think that within this definition, there are also other types of businesses that aren't necessarily car dealerships, I would imagine. Like rental car places and used car lots and others, which
Is
could
a lot of the dealership?
well, there's used car lots that are part of a new car lot as part of a dealership, and then there's a used car lot that only sells different brands of used cars. Those are different types of businesses. I would imagine that most exclusively used car lots that aren't associated with new car dealerships are predominantly outside, if not exclusively outside. There's no traditional showroom. A showroom is generally for new cars, and outside is either storage of new cars or used cars. I mean, generally, if you just think of when you go by a car dealership. What you're saying is, and I just want to make sure we're all clear here, that the non-showroom type of business, a rental facility that has a shed in a parking lot, and there are plenty of those, not just in Montgomery County, but around the country, where you just show up, you get your keys, you sign the waiver, you give your credit card, you go off and you get your car. But if it's just outside and there's no showroom, which would exclude new car dealerships, basically, that would still go through the conditional use process, because the new amendment that is being proposed either way would be changing the definition of a showroom to expand it to allow for outside as well as inside. Am I
That's
understanding this
correct.
correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so the concern about some of the smaller uses is probably satisfied by the very nature of the fact that we're going through the showroom definition. Because, I mean, how many businesses are less than 5 acres that have a showroom and are selling, are doing the type of uses that we're talking about? Do we know?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I could imagine footprints get pretty small. I'm thinking this is in the city of Rockville, but like the B&W that just built the huge parking garage over top of their showroom and to kind of shrink their space down. So theoretically, that
Right, same thing with Oarsman that was referenced earlier, but that is the same thing with Sport Honda and Silver Spring. But those are all in, as far as I can tell, CR or CRN zones, because it's much more expensive to do what they've done. They've done it because the land is expensive and because there's a lot of customers. That's where a lot of people live and work, and so they want to be where the people are. Okay, so I am less concerned about this than I was before, knowing that it's the definition of the showroom, and that I think is going to be the driving determinant here of size. The regulatory aspect of this is not going to dictate the size of the business nearly as much as the cost will. And, so I'm not sure we answered any questions here, but I at least understand much better of what the impacts are going to be, which is helpful to me.
And does that lead you into a place on the 5-acre trigger?
I mean,
Are you concurring with the original draft, or?
yeah, I mean, I think so vis-a-vis the two things that we've talked about now, what the original intent was, and, which is this site or a site like it in Aspen Hill, in an area where we frankly want a new car dealership and think that would be a value add to the community to allow this type of retail that's very difficult to do right now. And the fact that you need a showroom in order to get the limited use, which probably has a certain size. What are we accomplishing with the planning board's 5-acre cutoff of conditional use? I guess a large car dealership, a worse situation from a public interest standpoint than a small. Are we trying to encourage small car dealership? I mean,
Well,
what's the policy outcome that
I
that
think
we're
the
trying-
idea was just that if you have a lot of space, you have room to work with. You may be able to mitigate impacts on abutting
But
properties.
what would be your interest in mitigating the impacts if you're going through a limited use process, right? Like, the mitigation happens from the conditional use process. Now, I would say the conditional use process is more cumbersome than it should be, and we need to work on that, respectfully of everybody, but
Well, on a tighter site, you might
in the
be-
situation where you have the most ability to mitigate impacts, we would be asking you not really to have to mitigate those impacts. In situations where it's most difficult to mitigate impacts, we're telling you that you have to go above and beyond in order to mitigate impacts that you might not really even have a reasonable ability to mitigate.
Well, I guess the argument is that on a constrained site, you may be tempted to push the envelope. Whereas if you have a lot of room to work with, you're probably not going to be trying to jam things in cheek to jowl with things that are not compatible.
Well, I thought it was that large sites had kind of already essentially established a natural compatibility distance with the nearby neighborhood and things like that, whereas small sites might be more likely to be, in and just closer.
I mean, it's the same reason why infill tends to produce
Right,
more neighborhood
exactly.
pushback
Right.
than greenfield development, because you're not butting up against something that's already there in close proximity.
And there will be a site plan, and so it's not as good as conditional use and fully delving into residential compatibility, but there are still findings at site plan that we look at screening and compatibility, and I think that gets to the chairman's point that on the constrained sites, you just sometimes have to compromise in the sake of making it work. And on these bigger sites, you just have the room to get the little extra landscaping or to place the stormwater in a better location or to work with configuration of drive aisles to be a little more friendly with where headlights are going. And we look at those things at site plans. So
Okay.
Yeah, the site plan and conditional use in that respect are not worlds apart. The hearing examiner would be looking at those sort of things too.
So did council staff recommend the 5-acre?
So council staff's recommendation was based on, if there's a concern about the size, that it should be based on the zoned area instead of the site itself. So that was the basis of council staff's recommendation.
Can you kind of say that in English?
Sure, that rather than saying the 5 acres, limited or conditional, should be based on the size of the site itself, that it should be based on the size of the NR zone if the committee and council want to make that 5-acre distinction.
Interesting. So you would look at the whole, even if it's not that exact property, you'd look at the whole area.
Right, so if you have an NR zone that's only 2 acres, you wouldn't do light vehicle and sales and rental there. But if you have one that's 6 acres, like the whole zone, then you could, because of the idea that you have these shopping centers and larger shopping centers already exist, so vehicle sales and rental fits those areas already.
And that was your original draft.
No, that was not in the original draft. The original draft did not mention the 5-acre distinction at all. I think it arose because once we added
I
the
see.
outdoor storage piece, it became a different looking use.
So that's Amendment C on page 5 of the staff packet.
Yes.
In the NR zone, a light vehicle sales and rental use is allowed as a limited use if the area contiguously zoned NR is at least 5 acres in size. So that's your way of addressing this.
Yes, that was council staff's
similar
way of
concern.
addressing that issue without having to create 2 different processes. Because as Councilmember Friedson said, it's somewhat counterintuitive to do different processes for that same use.
And just to chime in here, I was comfortable with that amendment. And I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, could I just ask, since we're talked about a specific site, just for a matter of reference, do we know what the size of the underlying zone in Aspen Hill?
I don't know the
Yes.
exact number, but I did confirm that the 5-acre the 5-acre limit would not preclude the Lindsay Ford from going into Aspen Hill.
Well, I guess asked in a different way, is that site exclusively going to be the business, do we think, or do we think that business is part of a broader zone with other businesses?
if I'm remembering correctly, the gas station and the convenience store that's right on the corner of Georgia and Connecticut might also be in the same NR block. And then the site itself is about 10 acres in its own right, so it's a 12-ish acre NR zoned area.
It's one of the larger NR zones. There's only a handful over that 10 acres, and that Aspen Hill site is one of them.
So would it, I mean, the only thing that I would think of is if 5 acres is an appropriate number for an individual business, it would seem to be probably too small of a number for a total, the whole zone, unless the goal was to consolidate, which I'm not sure that's the goal here. I think the goal might even be the opposite, that we want to maintain some of the community serving, daily activity type, weekly activity type businesses in a zone. If there's a car dealership as part of that, that could be the anchor of that, then great. In this case, I actually think this could encourage those types of, a dry cleaner and a convenience store, other types of businesses, because it would be drawing traffic and would be increasing the value of that area for those other types of businesses. So I'm just wondering whether like 10 acres, for instance, for the underlying zone would make more sense.
Of the NR zones, there are not many over 10 acres. In fact, I would say, if I'm remembering correctly, most of the NR zones, I think, are actually under 5 acres.
Yeah, we settled on 5 because that was a natural break where about 2/3 of them were still under 5 and about 1/3 were over 5, very quickly tailing off from there. And so the board's actual direction to staff at the planning board hearing was, we think there should be a cutoff, but we'll let you decide, after the fact what that is. And when we looked at it, 5 acres seemed like the logical place to do it in a distribution of having an adequately sized envelope of properties that could utilize these provisions without it opening up everywhere. Don't know if that helps, but that's what we looked at.
Basically, most are under 5 acres.
Okay, but the planning board, if we keep the same size, the planning board recommendation for the individual size of the business would be more stringent than the council staff recommendation, which is the underlying of the zone. So I guess it's a
Yes.
policy question of do we want to be less stringent here or more stringent if we're going to accept the overarching premise that there should be a cutoff at all. It sounds like there's interest in accepting the premise of there being a cutoff at all, which I'm, comfortable moving forward with. I think the question is, unless we change the council staff recommendation to make it a higher number, it's a question of less, stringent here or more stringent.
Okay, last question I have. So Tesla has kind of a different model now. They have like a showroom, and they don't have lots. Is that allowed generally in Montgomery counties, urban areas? Like, can you do a vehicle showroom in a CR zone?
It would meet the definition of indoor storage, which I believe, indoor sales, which in most of our commercial and employment zones has some path to approval. It's not the same in each zone. I don't have the exact orders right in front of me.
Looking at the table, it would be light vehicle sales and rental indoor, and it would be limited or permitted everywhere but the NR zone, hence the ZTA. So yes, that would be allowed currently.
Okay, so we don't have to worry that
No.
you do that.
Westfield Montgomery Mall, there's a Tesla showroom that's inside. I mean, that's a very different business because they usually only have a few cars on display inside. They don't have indoor, outdoor. They don't have all their, vehicles, on site. It's all, by order.
And that's allowed.
Yes.
Good. All right. I'm good with council staff recommendation.
Okay.
Same here.
I'm comfortable moving forward with that then.
I think we talked that one through, for better or for worse. All right. So would you, is it just there were additional amendments, right? Or is it just?
So
item
it
C?
was adding outdoor storage to the definition.
Right.
It sounds like we're 3, I don't know if I heard Councilmember Joando, but that was, I think, 3 votes on that. And then
Yes.
5 acre zoned area, 3 votes on that, just to confirm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's it for the CTA.
Ooh, this was supposed to be the easy one.
They never are.
Yeah, first time. All right. Thank you. Okay, on to the next. Welcome, Ms. Saccone. Turn your mic on.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Good morning.
Morning.
So my name is Kandikila Sokoni. I introduce myself because I'm relatively new.
This is your first Fed?
My first Fed.
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Okay. I'm here to present ZTA 2205. It was introduced by Council President Albornoz on behalf of the County Executive and DPS. In fact, DPS staff and planning board staff are here. There's a little bit of history here, lots of heavy lifting. This has been going on for quite some time, so I do want to acknowledge, even though I'm presenting the packet, I do want to acknowledge the efforts of the team of professionals who have, worked very hard to get it to this point and put the whole thing together. My colleague, Livundu, and DPS, the County Attorney's Office, and all law staff whose RESJ impact statement is also in the packet. So as explained in the packet, the background here is that in 2014, when there was an extensive when extensive revisions to the zoning ordinance were made, the sign ordinance was actually excluded, left for another day. And so I guess this is that other day. Some highlights. So the various categories of the changes, we're not going to go through every single change. I'm thinking some of them are self-explanatory in the packet, but I just wanted to highlight the various categories. On the one hand, there's some provisions that have been implemented to eliminate barriers. There's certain things that required variances. So for instance, drive-through signs that were, compatible with incidental to the drive-through. That's something that did require special permission to have, and that's being taken out. Another example is, for instance, for businesses that abut a highway or a very busy arterial road. The current provisions say you can have your customer sign at your direct entrance. And one of the changes that's going to be proposed here, one of the changes in the ZTA, and in order to have a sign placed anywhere other than at your direct entrance, you had to get a variance. So there's that category of revisions that are eliminating the requirement for a variance and are making some of these, you're allowed to have this sign as of right. Then we also have the category of just cleanup. The definitions are being amended. So for instance, previously we had two categories. We had there were limited duration signs, but we also had a definition for temporary signs. The limited duration signs are now gone. We'll just have a simple one category, temporary signs. So the definitions is some inevitable cleanup in definitions as well. And then okay, so let me at this point maybe just dive into the actual packet. There was a public hearing with no speakers. We did receive one specific request that I alluded to from WPC, the Washington Property Company, and they were the business that explained the concern around having not being able to put a sign at an indirect entrance. So for instance, imagine say highway I-270. If you're a business that's you're abutting a busy highway, and yet you're only allowed as of right to have your customer sign on your direct entrance, then you may you'll now be able to have that one sign rather than have it at the customer entrance. You can actually have it facing the highway where you're going to have more traffic. We did have some recommendations from the planning board. So the ground signs definition in the ZTA was presented so that it would be a sign that did not start more than 12 inches, I believe, from the ground. And the planning board, planning staff pointed out the fact that rather than have this restriction about where the sign starts, let's just have a restriction about where it ends, because there's some landscaping. Sometimes you have, based on location, there's some landscaping details that may require them to have their sign start more than 12 inches up. So rather than dictate where they start, let's just say we don't want that sign to be more than 25 inches high. And that's a recommendation we reviewed. We reviewed it with DPS, and we actually agree with that change. One other change that was recommended by planning staff was now that we're getting rid of the limited duration signs and just having the one category of temporary signs, the temporary sign definition was restricted to 30 days, a sign that was going to be up for not more than 30 days on private property. And they say, there's some signs that some temporary signs that may need to be up for more than 90 days. For instance, leasing and real estate signs. And so we've changed, they were recommending a change of, say, 90 days. In consultation with staff, we agreed with that change. And so that's not in the ZTA that was introduced, but that's something that's in the memo as a recommendation we're agreeing with. Okay. One other change, another change this is a change actually recommended by council staff. This is at page 4 of the memo. The definition, so there was abandoned signs, and the abandoned signs had a sign is, abandoned signs are prohibited, and an abandoned sign would be one that's either no longer in use or in disrepair. And we recommend removing the or and having and, so that it's an abandoned sign would be one that is no longer in use and in disrepair, because there may be signs for a business that it's no longer in use, but if it's in repair, maybe there's not so much of a concern. And we didn't want to be in the business of sort of content-based regulation of determining, are you operating? Does this sign outside really reflect what you're doing? We're just saying we're concerned if the sign is in disrepair. And so the abandoned sign definition would be changed to reflect that. DPS staff are here. We've highlighted some of the very specific changes in the packet. And if you had, questions for them or for us about some of the very specific revisions, we're happy to address those. The list, I can just, a few highlights. There's also a change that creating a new subsection on the sign concept plan and sign variance provisions. That's in line 213 of the packet. We also have amendments about the role of DPS in issuing permits for a sign that's erected on historic, in a historic district. And like I said earlier, the drive-through signs will now be allowed as of right, rather than previously where you had to go get a variance to get a drive-through sign.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. We'll just hear from DPS if you'd like to share anything additionally about the process and your recommendation. Councilmember Friedson has a question, which we'll turn to after we hear from DPS.
Good morning. Thank you, Councilmember Hans Riemer and Friedson and Jowanda. I hope you feel better, Jowanda. This thing was brought to our attention by the Speed to Market group. They recommended for us as part of their group that we're looking at how to provide some help the development in the county. So one of the issues that they raised to us was the sign ordinance. As she mentioned, the sign ordinance, when we went through the 2014 rewrite of the sign ordinance, nobody wanted to touch the zoning rewrite. Nobody wanted to touch the sign ordinance. And there was a reason. So we compromised the group, which consists of government employees. Planning board had people participated. We had Department of Transportation. We also had the staff from DPS. We also had from private sector. That people that have been involved coming and obtaining sign. So some of the issues you see when we went through that is because Roger Water Street and Ms. Patricia Wolford, they have been involved with our sign. They go to the sign review board. Those are for variance signs. That's something that's not, they are not being able to do it in accordance to the sign ordinance. And sign review board takes a while. It takes a few months, if not longer, because these are sign variances, these are big projects. However, some of the issues that were raised by the people who were trying to get the signs from us, we took that into consideration when the committee was looking at this whole sign ordinance. We did our best. The group met once a week for hours, and it took us 3 to 4 months. Based on those meetings, we kind of went through the whole thing. And as you see in front of it, the whole section was edited. We changed, for example, the drive-through menu signs that you see when you go to the restaurants, to the drive-through, those had to be variances. So you had to go to sign review board. This is something it's done now. If you pass this thing, you're able to review that and issue those permits within 1 or 2 days. The same thing for the entrance signs. These are for the subdivision, goes through the site plan, is shown on the site plan. But still you have to go through a variance with the sign review board. It would take you 60 days to 80 days. Now Roger and Patricia and their group is able to review them and issue the permit right away. So hey, I want to thank them, thank the group, especially Park and Planning, which was really participating throughout this ordeal. And if you have any question, we got our experts sitting over here, and hopefully we can answer your questions.
Terrific. Thank you. Appreciate your convening that process, and thanks to everybody who participated. Ms. Wolford, Mr. Waterstreet, welcome. Thanks for being here. Andrew Friedson.
Well, first of all, thank you. It always seems impossible until it's done. So thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I know that it predates Councilmember Jawando and my tenure on the council when this was originally discussed and avoided. And so to finally take it up is a significant accomplishment in and of itself. I know that it's much needed. It was a major push of the Economic Advisory Group, as you mentioned. A number of business leaders and community advocates have been pushing for this to happen. And obviously, once you get mired in the details, it's tough to pull off. But I really appreciate all the work. In fact, the council passed, I had sponsored a signed zoning text amendment just related to our urban areas, a very, very narrowly tailored issue. And as we went and discussed that particular issue, the broader issues related to signs came up, and the constant refrain was, well, we'll be taking that up at some point. We're working on it. Well, now finally it has been taken up, and I know it, despite the fact that it's not well known by most, this is the work of local government, and really appreciate that happening. I think it's really important. Our world has changed a lot, and the way in which we allow signs and advertisements and others to occur need to change with it. And so I see this as really kind of catching up to the reality of the world that we live in. And so it's much appreciated. So I just wanted to note that and thank DPS staff, planning staff, council staff, everybody working on this, because I know how big of a task it is, and how little understood how much work that it can be once you really dive into these issues. I did have just a quick question on the abandoned sign question. This issue of not maintained or no longer in use versus and. I've learned that conjunctions are very important in legislating and zoning. This is one of the main lessons of the county council among many. Those conjunctions matter quite a lot, get cited quite a lot in legal proceedings. So I guess the only question is, and I don't have deeply held positions here, but I think it's important to understand, a sign that is no longer in use but is maintained, meaning that it's, I guess, in good working order, or that it aesthetically looks decent, would be okay and could stay there forever.
Correct.
So basically, you can have whatever content you want or no content at all,
Correct.
as long as you keep it in good working order, essentially, then there's no problem. Is that the thought process?
That is correct. In fact, a hypothetical would be, let's say, White Flint Mall. If the signs were still up, if the business doesn't exist as written, as it was currently written with the or, you could have an enforcement request, tear it, bring it down because it's no longer in use. But if it's in repair, it really shouldn't matter. So that's why we're adding the or.
So as long as you don't let the sign itself deteriorate
Correct.
to the point where it's a safety issue or an eyesore, et cetera,
Correct.
then we're not going to force you to tear something down.
Correct.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I just thought it was important to understand that a little bit. So I'm comfortable with that. Just, since I took a long time to get comfortable with our last one, I'll just spoil the ending here. I also think that the planning board recommendations, are reasonable, make sense as well. And I'm just really happy that we've gotten to the point where we can finally move this through and reiterate my appreciation. I know I have an understanding, at least, and I guess a sense of empathy for how much work this was. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. So we have some amendments from staff. Any objection? Move without objection?
Without objection. And the council staff recommendation as well, there was the request that came in that you noted earlier, and that seems reasonable to me as well.
Correct. And the one thing I just wanted to highlight about that request is I just want to make sure the committee understands they're getting one sign. Currently, they're entitled to one customer sign at a customer entrance. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear we're not rewriting it to allow that you can have your customer sign at your direct entrance as well as one by the highway. What we're saying is just that one sign can be placed, facing the highway without a variance.
Right, the idea being that the business should be able to decide where their one sign goes. That's most beneficial
Correct.
to their customers knowing where they're located or, advertising their business. We're not saying that it has to be at the direct entrance where people come in, because sometimes the driveway or the entrance is not the most visible place, and so they should be able to make that decision on their own without special accommodation or permission.
Absolutely.
Which to me makes sense and seems like there's agreement.
All right, very good. Councilmember Jawanda, all good?
Yeah, I'm all good. I just wanted to congratulate Ms. Saccone on an easy first ZTA. After that last one, you might have been scared off. So.
And welcome.
Thank you very much.
You came into the good part of the sign zoning text amendment.
After the last one, I was getting nervous, so thank you.
I bet. All right. Okay, then, without objection, we'll recommend this as amended to the full council. All right. Next, we have ZTA 2206, exemptions, historic resources, allowed uses. And let's see. So this was lead council member Rice, co-sponsored councilmembers Navarro, Katz, and Friedson, introduced June 14th. So let's walk through it. We did receive a letter from the county executive, I think, over the weekend, uncharacteristically early for the executive branch. And we can take that up in due course. All right.
All right, so CTA 2206 is exemptions on historic resources. The lead sponsors on this one is Councilmember Rice with co-sponsors Navarro, Katz, and Friedson. So a little bit of history. We did a ZTA was passed in, I believe, January that allowed certain uses on residentially zoned properties that had a density transfer. So this ZTA 2206, will expand that ZTA and will allow certain uses on residentially zoned properties that have frontage along an arterial or higher classified road as well. So going through the background, there's a list of certain uses that were in the former ZTA. It was clinic, office, retail service establishment, rural antique shop, and drive-through as an accessory use. So this ZTA would also be adding eating and drinking establishments to that use. So the planning board recommended an amendment that any use allowed should be subject to site plan review, and only those in the underlying zone that were not identified in this list would go through the conditional use process. And then the second amendment recommended by planning board was changing the term historic resource to individual historic site to make it clear that it doesn't apply to the entire historic district, just the actual property. We also received a letter from the Historic Preservation Commission that noted that because conditional use doesn't specifically require HPC review or the historic area work permit, there could be a situation where someone goes through the conditional use process and then applies for the historic permit and finds out they can't do it, which is obviously a waste of everyone's time. And I will address that amendment next. And then lastly, we received an impact statement, of course, from OLO that noted the CTA could sustain or marginally widen racial and social inequities in the county because historically the benefits of historic properties do accrue to white homeowners and more affluent residents. During the PHED committee work session that we had on the prior ZTA, planning had noted that they were working on, actually the committee had asked the planning department to continue to study and address why there are these very large disparities in how historic properties are treated in this county. And we have OLO here as well if you have more questions about that, or planning can provide an update on that work.
To be clear, I think there's disparities in the ownership of historic properties,
Yes.
as opposed to how they're treated, but
I think it was ownership and then which ones are designated historic as well. So going into the ZTA itself, so the intent of the ZTA is to encourage the maintenance and protection of historic sites, because it's obviously more expensive to maintain a historic property, and we want to keep them occupied. We want them to be available. We want people to see them and to use them. And so this ZTA, by allowing more commercial uses, we sort of promote these historic properties that we have. But a few of the identified uses are limited or conditional depending on which zone you're in. There's a table on page 4 of the memo that shows all the uses that are listed and then where they are conditional or limited. Want to highlight again that this CTA is only for residentially zoned properties. So council staff does agree with planning board that there should be one process for all of the identified uses, but something that should be noted, which I guess we talked about with the first CTA this morning, is there is a difference between site plan and conditional use. So site plan approval is about the design of the property. So you want to make sure that the site is appropriate, you have adequate public facilities, it talks about the appearance, it talks about landscaping, planning board looks at circulation patterns and open space, which is all about the site itself. But the conditional use process is about the use. So the hearing examiner can put conditions on the number of employees, the hours that you're operating, how many customers can be on the site at a time. And the reason I raise this is because these are some of these could be heavy commercial uses. For example, we received the letter from the county executive. Right now, the list includes eating and drinking establishments as well as drive-throughs. So you could have a drive-through restaurant in a residential neighborhood, and under site plan, you might not get those limits on hours, which you would get under conditional use. So something that council staff and planning discussed is whether everything should be site plan or everything should be conditional use.
Okay, are we going to come back to that concern, that specific one?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Actually, I'm going to say it right now, actually.
Oh, okay.
I won't make you wait. So council staff's recommendation is, well, first agreeing that we should change it to historic site, so that doesn't apply to historic district. That's the easy amendment. But in terms of making sure that we don't have 24-hour restaurants with drive-throughs or even some of the other uses that are listed, the committee would like to stick with site plan for these listed uses to at least add an amendment that would limit the hours. So the amendment council staff recommended is any use that's listed above must be closed to the public between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Because these are all going to be in residentially zoned areas, you get some of what you would get if you went through the conditional use process. And of course, if the committee or council would like other limits in terms of hours, employees, size of parking, that could be done as well. But this lets all of this go through site plan while still making sure the use itself is compatible, because the planning board would still have to abide by any use standard. So once that was in there, those hours would apply.
But doesn't it also need the approval of the Historic Preservation Commission?
Yes, you would still need the approval of the Historic Preservation Commission, whether it was planning board or the hearing examiner.
I mean, I didn't quite understand the specter of, now you have a drive-through McDonald's on an historic property.
Right, so the idea would
Historic Preservation
be,
Commission's never going to allow that.
if a McDonald's, probably you wouldn't want something that's a franchise, but let's say there was a restaurant that was like, no, we can actually build this restaurant and keep the historic building and add a drive-through. And Historic Preservation Commission really is just looking to make sure you're preserving that building. So hypothetically,
I don't know about
they
that,
could-
actually. They are looking, it's more than just whether the building is preserved. It's the setting, it's many things.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine something that they would be less likely to approve than, what's that, Pam?
Yeah.
Right, it's not
Right.
ours, it's just the.
It's not the operation of the use.
Okay, maybe I'm coming at it from a different angle, but I was just trying to suggest that the concern about, everything, all of these uses would have to be approved by the HPC, if I understood this zoning, so therefore,
So
there's
for
quite a check
example-
on,
Right, so this was raised because let's say there's a church that has a coffee shop they want to open.
right.
That coffee shop could open and be 24 hours with a drive-through, and site plan, you wouldn't necessarily have that limit. Like, it could still be 24 hours. You could still have people driving through the neighborhood all the time. And of course, it does have to front on an arterial, but that doesn't mean, like, you could still have parking in the back. It could still disturb the neighborhood. And that's why the recommendation for the hours, because that's a use standard, not a historic preservation or a site plan standard.
I see.
But-
So it's like, in other words, maybe the applicant doesn't talk about the hours of it's open, and it's not, you could say it's not truly germane. I'm not sure if that's, you could go by that, but, and then you find out after the approval, oh yeah, it's 24 hours.
Right.
Okay.
Well, honestly, how many churches, historic or not, have 24-hour coffee shops in them with people coming and going day and night? I mean, we in principle think it's probably, we don't love the idea of including these hours restrictions in the code. That hasn't been done before. And we just think that with respect, the concerns are highly speculative. We don't, and as you point out, Mr. Reamer, we think it's extraordinarily unlikely that HPC would approve a Wawa or something that was, even if the building's form were preserved, I think they would go to great lengths to find a way to avoid having that sort of situation. So we just think that the likelihood of some of the worst case scenarios is extraordinarily low, and you'd be introducing operational restrictions into, the use standards in a way that would set a precedent that I don't think we really feel like would be a good idea to go down that road.
I have a small correction. I can't think of what they are, but I did check because that's where I got the hours. There are 2 other uses that do have hours restrictions. I think it's
I
animal
think
clinic and one other use.
equestrian facilities and some others might have, but within the code. So I guess I understand the concern that planning has, but I do agree with the chair here that virtually all of the concerns that some might have, there is an additional protection here at the HBC. So I think that's an important point here that makes this different than others, that there is a significant hurdle, regulatory hurdle that these facilities have to overcome in order to operate, which does protect against some of the concerns that you may have raised. The one thing that they don't is the hours. I guess the question is, to me, we're providing a benefit here. So we are allowing for something to go through a less rigorous process because they're historic property. And I guess the argument that you could make for that, because I do think that a historic church property should be able to have a coffee shop, and I think that would be a real benefit to a large number of communities in the county that lack things like coffee shops in their community. And I don't think a historic building should prevent that from happening. We want to maintain the aesthetic of the historic property and the history, but we should be serving residents in their communities. But we don't make it harder to operate in a historic building, but in this case, we're actually making it easier to operate in a historic building. So the question is because you have to go through the HBC and most other of the concerns, pretty much all other concerns would be addressed, the one thing that perhaps wouldn't be addressed would be the hours. To me, mitigating that concern seems reasonable because I don't think that these are huge issues, but I think that could at least assuage some of the concerns that it goes through HBC, so the use is protected there, and the hours can't, the 24-hour doomsday scenario, which I don't think is going to happen anyway, couldn't even happen because we have put reasonable times. If we want to make the times earlier or later, whatever, I think that's fine. But to me, I don't really have an issue because we're making it easier. But Ms. Robeson?
If I may, just to kind of correct the record on the current process, we actually did have a drive-through on a historic property. It was a bank, and we approved it.
But it was always a bank?
Huh?
It was always a bank?
No.
It was not always a bank?
No, it was to be honest, I can't remember the original structure. It was from the 1800s 1800s. That's all I remember, and a bank was going in, and they
Wa-
wanted a
Wasn't it
drive-through.
that site where the Attorney General lived? It was, I think this was the subject of recent, I could,
I-
maybe I'm thinking of it.
I don't know. I just remember the drive-through, and we approved it.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that sounds a little different to me than a drive-through restaurant, but
But also, we don't get many drive-throughs. But just a couple of things about the current process. We don't consider a conditional use in a historic property until the HPC has approved it. And we just did a major one in June for the Audubon Naturalist Society. And they have been to the HPC. The HPC wanted to move their parking back to protect the historic vistas. And it pushed, so it pushed the parking back toward residences, and it was fine. We addressed it with conditions but so, the current process, we already do what, it's not a requirement.
But you do it as a matter of practice, not as it's a
Yes,
de
and
facto
Yes,
effort, but
It's-
there's nothing that requires that to occur.
No.
And so I think the recommendation here is to say that the practice that you're already taking, the HBC is requesting that that be codified. Is
I
there an
agree.
issue with the
it's more,
codification?
I don't have an issue with that. That's more, so far it's been a ZTA of common sense rather than mandate. We even give it to the HPC before rezoning. So I just want you to know that the scenario, and usually it's planning staff that refers it before we even see it. But I don't have a problem with mandating.
So we're
it.
basically just we're codifying the current practice, which is that the historic area work permit
Correct.
has been issued before it gets
Correct.
to the hearing examiner.
But what I did want to
Which seems reasonable, because why would we waste everybody's
Oh, I don't-
time if it's
That's
not going to get
fine.
the approval that it needs to move
That's
forward
fine.
anyway?
It shouldn't be a practice. It should be a mandatory requirement. I agree. As far as, though, just a few things about the impacts that you're discussing, it's not just the hours. And the Audubon Society was a great example, because when they push, nor is the arterial road as much of a protection, because what, in my experience, what the HPC does is they want to preserve the front. They want to preserve the view shed. So they push things like parking, lighting for the parking back toward the residences, as much out of sight as possible. So that's really, in the case we had, the parking was like 30 feet from this guy's property. And we addressed it, but all I'm saying is there are impacts that aren't protected by an arterial road. So I'm just really letting you know what we see. I'm not here to advocate for a conditional use versus a limited use. I would suggest, though, I don't have a problem with any of the uses listed, because we did get the drive-through through, it was in the back. But the eating and drinking establishment, a little bit what Mr. Friedson was saying is the coffee shop, well, I shouldn't say no-brainer, but yeah, they should have a coffee shop. I guess the thing is, there's no limitation on the size of the eating and drinking establishment. And it could be something like, I don't know if you've ever been to Brookville Inn. That has a significant amount of parking. Now, they have a very large area to buffer it. So my point is only that there are, because of the HBC's, as you said, Mr. Reber, to preserve the historic frontage, they do push these things, and what the complaints we get are noise from people talking and car alarms beeping and lighting and that type of thing. Now, maybe the hours address it, but not in all case. So I'm just letting you know a little bit. I don't think we have a disagreement, certainly not for the coffee shop, but I just wanted the council to be aware of some of the impacts that we see. And I don't have a problem mandating HPC review first. That's the way it should be, so somebody doesn't we don't want people ping-ponged around. So I just wanted the council to be aware of some of the impacts that we see. A recommendation or suggestion could be to limit the size of the eating and drinking establishment. The coffee shop's not gonna have a lot of parking. Even if a coffee shop had a drive-through, that, as I said, we've approved drive-throughs. So those were just
So
my
I'm
brief
hearing like
comments.
there's sort of a challenge in a process where there's one set of concerns at HPC and there's a different set of concerns essentially, or there are concerns that will be given more, I don't know if it's a different set of concerns, but anyway.
More weight.
More weight perhaps, or they're just more part of that process. So there's a little bit of a tension where the applicant might think that they have achieved something, and you're saying, well, from a community perspective, the issues that you work on have been the most important. And so if we're...
I'm not
if
saying they're
we're-
more important, I'm just
Yeah.
saying they exist.
It's just a challenge, yeah.
Because the HBC does not look at
Yeah.
the community impact. But we don't take a policy position. I'm just
Right.
telling you what we've experienced.
It's going to be a challenge for the applicant to know that they need to know that there are different concerns that the different approval bodies have. Ms. Ballo, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Rebecca Ballo, for the record, with Historic Preservation. I would just like to offer a clarification to what my colleagues are saying as well about the Historic Preservation Commission's review, particularly when it comes to historic sites. It is not limited to the frontage. When a site is designated as historic in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation, an area called an environmental setting is created. Now, in urban areas, we are used to providing perhaps a higher level of scrutiny for the frontage or for the portions of the property that are most viewed by the public and are architecturally significant. However, the environmental setting, the HPC looks at impacts within that entire parcel, that entire designated setting, in particular when it comes to the larger lots or to farms, for example, or properties that have many agricultural buildings or just a number of buildings within that environmental setting. The Spencer Car property in Spencerville, for example, there's a house, there's the dairy barn, there's the silo. And in terms of the master plan sites that may be subject to the ZTA, just looking at the rough number of them, they range in size from a quarter acre to almost 1,000 acres for a mill site. So it really, the range is very large. And with the language that's being proposed, the HPC is required to make findings about compatible operational characteristics, as is the planning board. And it both
That's
of
going to be a
those,
challenge for the HPC, right?
I think they are well suited
Okay.
to the task. But
I guess
yes,
I really
to
meant
your
for
point,
you, because you have to now be, I mean, you're heightening your regulatory role in a sense.
In a sense, yes, you are correct. And that is why at the HPC hearing, but also at the planning board hearing, for the HPC, we notify adjacent property owners, so for a historic site, the people that are all adjacent to it for the work permit, whether they are historically designated or not, are notified and are encouraged to come to the HPC and to, give their testimony, to give their thoughts at that public hearing. But I just wanted to clarify that about what the HPC looks at in an environmental setting, the relationship of the building to each other, all the buildings,
Yeah.
the landscapes, and the neighborhood as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so where does this leave us? Again, we received the letter from the executive branch. I didn't fully, it didn't seem to me that they grappled with the reality of the HPC's approval in the process. So raised a number of concerns, but it wasn't clear to me whether those concerns were really, I mean, it seemed to me those concerns were the kind of concerns that are contemplated, and there is a process. But if anyone disagrees, and I don't see the executive branch here, so.
I don't disagree, but I did want to note in response to the county executive's letter that a map of the affected properties is on the last page of the packet, because it does limit it to, so it's not every historic site because it's on along the major road. So I just want to note that there is a map at the end of the packet, because there was a request for one in the letter.
Well, that's a good question. Do you want me to throw that out there? All right. Stepping back a little bit, does this ZTA effectively raise the regulatory role of the HPC and bring it into new content that hasn't previously been part of the HPC? Is there a concern about whether we have adequate staffing and whether that's an appropriate function for the HPC? Is this really the way we want to do it?
To be honest, I think that this tension between the HPC's wheelhouse of considering the impact on historic resource and setting and the other compatibility standards and other things that the planning board considers, it creates a problem in not just this context. If you think about, and I hate to even bring it up, Tacoma Junction, I think the HPC made some decisions in its approval of the Tacoma Junction design that really were outside the scope of the narrowly construed four corners of historic preservation review about things like how much open space had to be required, et cetera. Whether those were good judgments or bad judgments, really not the point I'm trying to make. But if you want to avoid this ping pong effect, I think you are going to have to accept that in the real world, HPC's review often is controlling and in some ways displaces the planning board's authority to the extent we're not going to try to second guess an HPC decision and send an applicant all the way back through the process to redesign their project. It pains me to say that, but I think that's just the reality of the situation. So I think that when HPC reviews a project like this, they perhaps should not be foreclosed from, in fact, might be encouraged to consider impact on the neighborhood as well as the strictly historic preservation related considerations in order to make sure that if the applicant gets it through HPC, they have an approvable project.
I just want to make a quick note that HPC recommends approval. They are not the final decision maker, so
Well,
that is also a note.
They do come through the planning board, but by the time it gets through HPC, we have a dilemma. If we don't like what HPC did and think that they've sort of overstepped their bounds, we're going to jam the applicant up and cause them, additional delay. And
But do you have to send, I'm sorry,
No,
do you
go ahead.
have to send something back if you, isn't the HPC an advisory recommendation to the planning board? Can't you ultimately decide what you think is appropriate via a board
In
decision? principle,
principle, that's correct, but what I'm saying is that in practice, if you see an applicant that's gone through HPC and HPC said, I don't like the setbacks, I think you should have more open space, you should limit the height of the building in ways that maybe are not directly tied to the historic preservation standards, we are in a difficult position. And I'm just acknowledging that.
So I guess at first I was unclear as to, Ms. Ballo, the points that you were raising. I think the council staff recommendation, which is intended to just codify the timing, does note a recommendation of approval, at least if I recall the recommendation by council staff. That would create, I think, a binding standard for what is generally conceived as a recommendation, which is non-binding. It's very important and, perhaps can be de facto binding, at least from the planning board's perspective, but we would be codifying it to be binding. So I think we should be very careful with that language because I do think that perhaps would change the function. which is not intended here, and I don't believe was intended in the way that was described by council staff, but I just want to make sure of that. Maybe.
Right.
Councilmember Friedson, if I can point out, the language about operational characteristics and the role of the HPC vis-a-vis the site plan and the planning board, that's existing. In the,
Yeah, I think what I'm trying
That's not
to.
new, we're just expanding it to these additional use categories. But it was already existing in the code.
Yeah, the ZTA that was passed in January said, I can read from it, but it said operational characteristics must not encroach upon or destroy historical, archaeological, or architectural character or value of the site. That was already in there. And it already said the project must be recommended for approval by the Historic Preservation Commission prior to approval of the site plan by the planning board. So that was already in this section of the zoning ordinance per the ZTA that was just passed in January.
If I may, in the cases we've had, the HPC has not looked at impacts on the community. They've looked at it from a historic perspective. And what happens is we take, and again, this is uncodified and you can codify it, but we take their recommendation as binding, and then it's up to us to work with the rest of it to try and fix, or not fix, but try and address these other compatibility concerns. So I'm not sure that making the HPC work permit binding really changes their current role. But I do think, and the environmental setting is true, but we typically have them push things back. That's, in every case I've had, that's the way it works. And that's fine.
So nothing
But
happens.
what I'm saying is, for all intents and purposes, we take the HPC review as binding, and then we work with, you know, the applicant redesigns the site for the HPC, and then we work with what the applicant has come up with to address the HPC's, you know, the
But in
new
this
site layout.
context, you wouldn't be working with the applicant at all, because the applicant would exclusively be working with the HPC, because you're not part of the conversation yet,
No, I'm just
right? I
clarifying.
mean, I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Well, I'm confused then, well, doesn't matter if I'm confused.
The-
I thought it had to go to planning board. Is this saying that the HPC now looks at the community impact?
So the way the ZTA is written, there are certain uses that are limited uses, so they go to site plan, and there are certain uses that are conditional uses in some zones, and so go to the hearing examiner. So the issue raised that council staff and planning agreed on is it should be one process for the listed uses, and the question is, should that one process be site plan, or should the one process be conditional use? So the compromise that council staff presented is, the concern is all of the various impacts that Ms. Robeson listed. So if you say, so the amendment proposed is, fine, we'll do site plan, but limit the hours, and that can help mitigate some of the issues that would have been addressed if you'd chosen conditional use instead. So that's the amendment that's before the committee, is whether to add something to limit the hours, since under site plan normally you wouldn't get anything like that because they're not doing use standards.
Well, I'm glad we can take them up one at a time, but there are really two amendments before the committee. The first amendment, and I'm not sure how we got into both amendments at the same time, but the first amendment, which I agree with and would be supportive of, is to have the hours.
Right.
So keep it limited use. That would put historic properties at a different standard, in this particular case exclusively a lower standard than all other properties in the underlying zone for the same use,
That's true.
but would restrict the hours in order to mitigate that to a modest extent. So I'll just say I'm comfortable with that. I think we should dispense of that. Then we have the second amendment that we should take up subsequent to that, and that is the timing and what is included from the succession of whether it's current practice or not, it's not codified.
So that isn't actually an amendment before the committee, because the way the current zoning ordinance is, planning board can't approve the site plan without approval from the Historic Preservation Commission. So that amendment's not before you, because that's already in there. It's in the current language.
I thought you suggested that the ZTA could be amendment to say that the hearing examiner can't grant approval until the submission of a historic area work permit and a
If the
recommendation of
committee-
approval from the HPC.
Right.
Just
so
like the planning board.
that's if you decided to make all of them conditional use instead of making all of them site plan. So I guess the two options are everything's going to be site plan and you're going to limit the hours, or everything's going to be conditional use and you'll require HPC approval. Those are the two choices.
Got it.
And putting in the hours is a way of preempting
Car alarms,
and
lights,
the kinds
traffic.
of issues.
Yes.
So it's reducing the risk theoretically for the applicant that
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get a significantly different outcome, at least
Right.
in the case that we're using to kind of model this out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Spell?
Thank you. If I may offer, if the committee and then the council are inclined to include the language about the hours, I would like to advocate at least for an earlier start time to those hours at 6 in the morning. I'm thinking of a couple of our historic sites that are located along arterials that have interest as breakfast locations, breakfast diners. I'm thinking of one in particular across from NIH, and others that are located adjacent to other federal facilities that have a workforce that comes in, at an early morning time, and that perhaps just bumping the start hours back to 6 a.m. Similarly for a coffee shop or for a smaller restaurant to have the closing time at 11 p.m. So restricting the hours to 11 to 6. I know this is, it really is a fine distinction, but I think it also addresses the concern about not having a 24-hour Owawa or, an all-night music and club establishment. Just like to throw that out there.
Council staff has no objection to 11 to 6.
All right. I mean, very few restaurants are open until 11, to be quite honest, in Montgomery County. So I find it, I guess this is theoretical. Typically 9:30 is that's when your customers are.
We can do 10 to 6.
I guess I don't object to 11 to 6, but I'm just observing. I'm not.
Just to be clear and technical, because people are watching, we have mixed up the hours, so it would be 6 to 11. 6 a.m., which is the morning time, to 11 p.m. I know that sometimes we feel like we're in an alternative universe here. The time-space continuum doesn't exist, but the morning comes first, the evening comes second. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. 6 to 11 is what is before us, or at least what we're discussing.
I'm fine.
Okay, so this is the site plan strategy with the hours. And I want to ask again, though, so Chair Anderson, you raised an intriguing issue, which is that generally speaking, your practice hasn't been to reconsider HPC recommendations, although you have the authority to approve whatever it is that the board wants to approve. Since we're taking the site plan strategy, is there any language we need here to leave you some wiggle room to? You have wiggle room as a legal matter. It's your choice.
Well,
so maybe no language is needed in the code because there's nothing to.
I'm not sure we can do this in the code. I think it's a broader question, but one thought that and I haven't given it a lot of thoughts, I'm just giving you top of the head, is that perhaps we could get an earlier planning staff to HP. Rebecca's interactions with planning staff could be in parallel, even though it's going to HPC first for the HOP. So that way, if planning staff is identifying tension between what HPC might recommend or what Rebecca might recommend and some of the other planning board type considerations, there would be an opportunity to reconcile those at an earlier stage of the process, at least at the staff level. And I guess I would encourage Rebecca and the other staff to call those things to the attention to HPC and remind them, because we do respect the work that they do, and it's very important and it's appropriate. But I do think there are cases in which they seem to sort of overlook the fact that they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to be responsive to the people sitting there in front of them, some of the neighbors who have issues, and sometimes I think they go a little bit too far outside of the strict confines of historic review and into issues like, well, the neighbors said they wanted this or they wanted that, so let's, try to be responsive and accommodating to that. So I don't think it's something we do in the code, but I think that there's room for maybe a little bit of change in our practice at this in terms of staff review.
Well, and working with your planners.
Right.
I mean, you have professional planners who, that's what they do, right? And so there's a good...
Right, and it sounds like the committee is on the same page, so I think it's helpful to get that direction to the planning board as well as to HPC staff and planning staff, that they would like to make sure that HPC's review is confined to those things that are strictly necessary to consider the impact on the historic resource and not collateral issues, which may be important and valid, but probably ought to be left for the planning board.
Well, it's trying to narrow the scope, but also to the extent that you can't, because that's the nature of the applicant, working with the planning staff for best practices and, so that the record is clear as to what the planning folks, think is wise. And then, the HPC will ultimately make its decision, but, there's a bit of a process that has been utilized. And so if something comes to the board where it was really clear from a planning perspective, it was X, but what came back was X.5, then the board will consider, hey, maybe we need to go back to X, despite it all. But Ms. Ballow.
I think that Chair Anderson's point is very well taken, and I appreciate the comments from the committee as well. The existing DRC process that we have set up for the review of our site plans, the historic preservation staff are included within the DRC. We are accustomed to giving comments at very early stages, even for concept plans when they come through administrative subdivisions and the like. And we have a very, very good open line of communication with all of our colleagues in the regulatory review who do routinely come to the Historic Preservation Commission and advise them on ZTAs, on cases that require concurrent preliminary plan and site plan approval. So we will, strengthen those lines of communication and work with our colleagues early on in the process so that it is streamlined for the applicants and so that all of these issues are hashed out at the very earliest stages.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I know this doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just
It's
occasionally.
the once every so often, but when it happens, it's a big issue.
It can cause a lot of tension. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've worked it through. Why don't we take a break for 30 seconds, I guess? Here we go. All right. I was going to filibuster, but I've already been doing that all morning, and I'm out of breath.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Councilmember Jawando.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Actually, the audio is very faint. I'm not sure why, but I can hear you, but just be aware.
Better or worse?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say I'm fine with the amendment as described in 6 a.m. to 11. I tried to chime in. I think I was faint there. But the 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. With the site plan approach, which I think is where we're heading, and appreciate Chairman Anderson's and Ms. Ballow's comments. But were they recommending, I guess my only question would be, they're not recommending a specific code change. They're just pointing out an issue that we may take up later. Am I characterizing that appropriately?
I see nods of agreement across the board.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't, because it was faint, I did not hear you previously, but all right. So with the amendments in the packet, noting one will be 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Without objection, and then all in favor of the ZTA, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Okay, thank you, everyone. Our work is concluded.
Sorry, I held out as long as I could.